Welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Marnie Reven, and I am hosting today the AIA Research Academy webinar with Marco Valussi. I'd like to welcome you to this August 11th, 2026 presentation. The AIA Research Academy is made possible by a generous grant from the Gat-Fossé Foundation. The link will be in the chat here shortly. Our mission at the AIA Research Academy is to educate, motivate, empower the global community of aromatherapists to practice using the evidence base and create their own research, especially case studies. We do this with one-to-one mentoring and group mentoring and through these webinars. If you would like to become a member of the AIA Research Academy, it's free. You can simply sign up at the link that I will put in the chat. You'll receive notifications about upcoming webinars and have access to all the previous ones. So we also have a YouTube channel, and we'd really love it if you would subscribe there. When you do subscribe there, we appreciate when you watch the video all the way through, when you comment, and when you like. All right, so today's webinar is called Systematic Review in Practice. It is presented by Marco Valussi, who's a qualified UK-trained clinical herbalist and aromatherapist. So Marco has a keen interest in the philosophy of science and the rational justification of therapeutic claims. His involvement in traditional herbal medicine and aromatherapy, as well as in scientific research, has given him insights into some of the pitfalls that aromatherapists may encounter when considering the role of science, and on the centrality of critical thinking. By the end of this presentation, participants will be able to discuss the merits of a systematic approach to evidence evaluation, to use simple systematic tools such as PICO to structure the analysis of a paper, and to understand the importance of quality assessment. So Marco is with us today. Marco, would you just like to say hi?
Hello. Nice to see you here.
So Marco is going to be with us throughout the presentation. We would like you to either put your questions in the chat or stay to the end to be able to ask questions of Marco. Also in the chat, I will be putting a link for Marco's Substack, where you can see more of his writings and follow Marco. So without any further ado, I'll go ahead and share the presentation. The presentation is pre-recorded, but as I said, Marco will stay with us throughout, and at the end, we'll answer questions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar of this course, which is called Systematic Reviews in Practice. Now, we practitioners, researchers, face a special challenge. We usually investigate topics we deeply care about, and this gives us insight, motivation, and practical understanding of the matter at hand, which are very important things. But it also increases the risk of bias. Well, firstly, abandon an essential oil or a modality of using essential oils in the face of negative evidence, and also the tendency to search for, interpret, and favor and recall information in a way that confirms or supports our beliefs or values. For this reason, methodological safeguards are not to professional identity, they are protections for the professional identity. Science, again, I reiterate, is not an enemy of pluralism. On the contrary, it's one of the best tools we have to manage disagreement without coercion, of course. Since practitioners bring both insight and bias, we need research methods designed to protect a correct and pluralistic interpretation. And one of the most powerful of these methods is the systematic review. What is a systematic review? A systematic review is not a simple literature summary. It's a type of synthesis of scientific evidence, a predefined, reproducible research project designed to minimize bias at every step of the process. It's designed to answer a specific question by identifying, evaluating, and then synthesizing all the relevant studies for that subject. It's a way, let's say, of mapping what you know and what you don't know about the specific matter at hand. But why do we need such structured methods? Well, the answer lies in the overwhelming volume and variability of the biomedical literature, and also in realizing that no single study can answer a clinical or scientific question in a reliable way. So we do need to manage very large numbers of papers, and that is a problem. In fact, each year, biomedical science produces roughly 2 million new articles across tens of thousands of journals. Many of these studies are small, many are methodologically weak, or they produce conflicting results. And this makes it almost impossible to rely on individual studies to inform our clinical activity. And systematic reviews help identify whether evidence is coherent, contradictory, or maybe insufficient. So a systematic review is not a simple summary, it's a structured attempt to answer a question across all available evidence. Systematic reviews are interesting as a form of study because they are a very accessible form of research. They don't need, we don't need labs or specific instruments apart from a computer and internet connection to do a systematic review. And this makes them a very democratic tool, given that there are less economic or technical obstacles to perform them. And they're also a transparent and reproducible tool. For practitioners, these are powerful tools because they, at the same time, teach two essential components of the general competence that we need to have. One, how to read research in a critical way, and how to produce research in a responsible way. So these competencies are important, and in a way they are inseparable competencies. To understand their value, it helps to contrast them with a traditional narrative review. Narrative reviews, sometimes referred to as literature reviews or traditional reviews, don't belong to the family of evidence synthesis. They are sort of useful educational tools, but they are typically unstructured and difficult to reproduce. They usually rely on the author's subjective judgment when they select or interpret the studies, and they lack the formal systematic methods that define evidence synthesis and minimize bias. Systematic reviews, in contrast, follow predefined procedures that reduce subjectivity and allow other researchers to reproduce the process. Now, I'd like for you to try a mental exercise. Just read these two summaries on the same topic, the one that I'm showing you right now, and ask yourselves, which of the two passages feels more trustworthy, and why does it feel more trustworthy? Now, give yourself 15-20 minutes and ponder on this. You can stop the slide and then come back to me. Okay, I hope you had enough time to ponder. My own thoughts on this subject are that the second summary feels more trustworthy because transparency creates trust, and the second passage is very transparent regarding the process we went through to find the answers. And again, because process matters as much as conclusions. Although it's quite common that when we read a scientific paper, we skip the section on materials and methods and go straight to the conclusions, although we know that we shouldn't. So this is why evidence synthesis methods like a systematic review are so important, because they systematically compile and analyze information from multiple documents to develop an overall understanding of results. Now, systematic reviews are a sort of evidence synthesis method, and they examine benefits and harms of the interventions, but there are other types of evidence synthesis that address questions beyond just effectiveness and safety. For instance, we have qualitative evidence synthesis, which consider multiple interest holder perspectives, issues of feasibility or acceptability of the procedure to improve the understanding of the intervention complexity and of the context of the intervention. Then we have the mixed method reviews, which extend beyond what works to include questions regarding how and why and when something may or may not work. And they include, again, contextual factors such as patients' experiences and so on. And then we have the reviews of reviews or overviews of reviews, which are whose aim is to provide a broad, comprehensive overview of the already existing evidence synthesis. And then we have the big picture reviews, which is a large umbrella term, which includes scoping reviews, mapping reviews, evidence gap maps, and so on. And these follow the same stages of the review process, but they don't synthesize evidence or they don't produce common effect measures, but instead they aim to describe or organize and map the evidence, providing an overview of the existing research for other researchers to work on them. If time or resources are a constraint, rapid reviews mode speeds up the review process by simplifying or omitting systematic evidence synthesis and clearly defining methodological shortcuts. So when we have no time or no money to do a complete review, we can try the rapid reviews with the understanding that the results are probably less cogent than the ones with a complete systematic review. And then we have the living evidence synthesis modes, which are systematic reviews, which are continuously updated by regularly searching for new evidence. Okay, this is a picture of some of the most important evidence synthesis methods. And once we accept the need for these systematic methods, we can then examine how a systematic review is actually conducted, a normal systematic review. Now, although details vary, systematic reviews generally follow several stages. We have the writing and the registering of a protocol, the defining of the research question and of the eligibility criteria, the searching and selecting of the studies, the extraction of the data, the assessing of the risk of bias of single works, the synthesis phase, and then at the end, the evaluation of the certainty of the conclusions, if it's possible. Each step must be planned before the review begins to prevent selective interpretation. So it's important that the protocol is already complete by the beginning of the systematic review, and you make no changes to the protocol. The most important step is actually the earliest one, asking the right research question. This is really the most important one, because a vague or an overly broad question leads to meaningless results. Frameworks such as PICO, the PICO, helps structure questions so to avoid vague or broad questions. These frameworks force clarity. They help in defining the scope of the study. They determine which studies are relevant and how evidence will be interpreted, and they help to structure the search strategy. These framework force precision on the researcher, and they determine the entire review structure. And they do this by defining, well, the type of population that we are dealing with, so age, gender, type of disease, severity of disease, and so on, then the intervention or the exposure, so which molecule, which kind of surgery or occupational therapy, or which risk factor if we're talking about exposure. And then we have the C, which is comparison or control, and we have to define and determine which control was used. And also we have to know what were the outcomes, whether they were desirable or not. Again, as I said before, PICO and all the other tools that we have, there are more than 35 now, are there to force you to think very carefully and specifically about your research question, the types of studies you need, the databases you have to peruse, and so on. And to illustrate this, I will briefly show you how we use this approach in our own systematic review on essential oils and viral infections. Now, during the pandemic, social media rapidly spread claims about antiviral effect on essential oils. As practitioners and researchers in the field, we were both informed and potentially biased, as we said at the very beginning. And the topic involved strong emotional pressure and also commercial interest, as you can imagine. Conducting a systematic review allowed us to discipline our own interpretation and participate in scientific dialogue while maintaining a professional identity. In our case study, we asked a broad but structured question about antiviral and virucidal effects of single essential oils across lab, animals, and human models, excluding computational modes and mixtures. Defining these boundaries was essential to maintain coherence and interpretability. And once the question was defined, the next challenge was finding the evidence, which means defining inclusion and exclusion criteria to define acceptability of a paper. Here you see our table of inclusion criteria. As you can see, the scope was wide, including all types of studies apart from in silico ones, all types of administration, all types of outcome, but only whole essential oils. And the exclusion criteria that I'm showing you here clearly excluded isolated compounds, extracts, and mixtures of essential oils. These exclusions were made to focus on essential oils and reduce the sheer number of papers, which would have exploded if we were to study all isolated molecules as well. We also excluded studies which did not have a control and an effect measure. The overall objective of this systematic review was to synthesize and critically appraise the scientific evidence on the topic of the antiviral and the virucidal properties of essential oils from any plant or herb, from any sort of source, in order to create a comprehensive qualitative synthesis of the current body of knowledge. Again, I'd like for you in the next slide to go through an exercise, the building of a research question, because I think it's quite important even to try a mental exercise on this. Please give yourself 15 minutes, choose a modality, an intervention of choice, an essential oil that you like, whatever. It doesn't need to be aromatherapy, it can be anything, and build a list of PICO questions as if you were to systematically explore the issue. Now, think about that and work on it. And when you're ready, let the slide go on. Now, there is no, I have no specific things to say about this exercise of yours. I've done it because I wanted you to try it, but perhaps a common experience, that at least what I experienced when I started doing this sort of exercise, is that that many of the questions I had, intuitive questions I had, were not answerable using a PICO list. So you would have to change the way you pose your questions to make them fit a PICO list. And this is useful because it helps you to define and clarify your thoughts, and also make these questions generalizable, so any other researcher can use your PICO questions to run a similar exercise. Now, once you have a research questions, you need to go through the next step, which is search and selections of all the relevant papers. Now, searching for evidence must be exhaustive and transparent. That's what we do in a systematic review. So reviews typically search at least 3 major databases using predefined search strategies, combining free terms, control vocabulary, synonyms, and Boolean operators. The entire search strategy must be documented, including dates and databases used. Again, structure, reliability, and transparency are paramount. The Boolean operators that you might want to use, that you will use, are 3. The AND operator or association operator, which finds only those records which include all the words and is used to link the different PICO categories. Then we have the OR operator or SUM operator, which widens the search and finds all the records with at least one of the words, and is usually used to sum the terms inside a PICO category. And then we have the NOT operator or exclusion operator, which excludes all the records that contain one or more words. In this case, this operator is usually too strong to be really useful because it increases the risk of systematic bias and also unintended data loss. So usually we don't use the NOT operator. And here is how the operators are used in a PICO framework. The OR is used inside the fields to try to cover all cases of interest, and the AND operator is used to link all the different fields. An important part of the strategy is the building of the search terms, and this must be done using both free terms with all the synonyms and possible variations, and the control vocabulary terms, terms which are mapped and clearly defined in Mesh, for instance, on PubMed or other database indexing sites. The search terms have to be then used as a search string, as a search strategy in each database we intend to use. Talking about databases, there are many bibliographic databases to use. I'm here showing you the most important ones from the Medline PubMed website, which we all know, but beware because of the cuts that have been done lately and the problems that have been that occurred with this database. This database is now less reliable than it used to be. But anyway, it's a free, very large biomedical database, and so it's really important. And then we have the pay-per-use databases such as Embase, Chinal, which is a database of nursing studies, the PsycInfo, which is a database for psychology studies, the Cochrane database for clinical trials, and then Pedro, which is again a free database on physiotherapy. All these direct towards real papers. So they link to real papers, which you can download for free or not for free. You can pay for them, but they are there. But we also have citational databases such as Scopus or Web of Science, which do not directly link to papers, but they direct to citations. It's also worth thinking about exploring the so-called grey literature, which is literature produced by organizations outside of the traditional commercial or academic publishing channels or distribution channels. And they comprise reports, technical reports, scientific reports, working papers, blog posts, government, official government documents, white papers, general evaluations. Of course, this literature is less reliable than the scientific one, but still they're of great interest to widen the scope of the search. And once the search strategy has been decided and the database is chosen, it's time to create the specific search string for each database. Here you see our own search strings created for the 7 databases we choose to use in our systematic review. The strings here are in the shortened format for ease of consultation, but really they should be created and presented in the extended form, which allows for better replicability by other researchers. So this that you see here, for instance, is the extended format for the PubMed search string. As you can see, each term occupies a single line. And here is the summary of the second step: identifying literature according to the handbook for conducting systematic reviews for health effects evaluations on the 7 databases. This is what we did. We used that handbook to select the studies and then to exclude studies based on the preset criteria. All sources were searched until May the 5th, 2020. No restriction were made for the publication period. No restriction were made on languages. We didn't sort unpublished studies, again, to reduce the amount of papers we have to go through. Duplicates were eliminated, and then there was an initial selection based on the title and summaries, after which the ambiguous studies were moved to full text evaluation. And then, after identifying the potential studied, we had to decide which ones were eligible. And this is the third step, which is a full text review of all the articles accepted. Any exclusion done at this stage was recorded in a follow-up document with a brief justification for the exclusion decision. As you can see, once you start the formalized process, you have always to explain and justify every step you take, every paper you accept or don't accept. 2 evaluators independently selected the studies for inclusion and exclusion, and if a consensus was not reached, a more in-depth evaluation was run, and the contradictory results discussed with a 3rd examiner until consensus was reached. In the next slide, you can see the flow chart detailing this selection process that leads us from the initial selection of 13,306 studies to the elimination of almost 5,000 duplicates, and then the exclusion of more than 6,000 papers deemed not suitable after simple title and abstract reading. And then we went to the further exclusion of almost 1,700 studies after full text review to arrive at 404 eligible studies. These 400 studies were further compared to the list of exclusion and inclusion criteria to get to the final number of 196 studies, further subdivided in mechanistic, plant models, animal models, and clinical studies on humans. When we arrived at this number, it was time for the next step, which is data extraction. Data extraction from the relevant studies we selected. The data that were sought were source of financing, viral identity, essential oil identity, the results of the experiment, and the toxicity results. In case of human studies, we sought the study design, the demographic data, the type of comparison used, if there was any comparison used, and the dosage used. In case of animal models, we sought the sex, the species, and the strain of the animal, the source of the animal, which lab or which stabulary, the age, the diet, if there was anything specific on the diet, and the dosage of essential oil. And then in the case of mechanics studies, in vitro studies, we analyze the cell type or the type of the tissues or cells were originated, the species, and the strain. We then extracted data on the concentration of essential oils, the vehicle used, if there was any vehicle used, the duration and intensity of the exposure. We sought data on cytotoxicity, trying to differentiate between direct effect on the virus or toxic effect on host cells. We looked at efficacy, measured as inhibition of cytopathic effect or reduction of plate formation or reduction in virus yield. And usually when examining the paper, we use the EC50 as a standard reference, and we decided that EC50 values superior to 100 micrograms per milliliter were not taken into account because the effect was not interesting enough. And EC50 values below 10 micrograms per milliliter were considered interesting. The ratio between the toxicity and the efficacy gave us the selectivity index, which is again an index similar to the therapeutic index for human studies that tells you how interesting and promising the agent is. The higher the selective index value is, the more the effective dose is distant from the toxic dose. And so we decided to not consider values of SI below 4, while all the values of SI above 100 we consider very promising for in vivo tests without side effects. In the next slide, I'm going to show some of the results in a table format. Here you see a summary table on essential oils and viruses, comprising efficacy, toxicity, selectivity index, and risk of bias. And here you can see a table summarizing the number of studies divided by virus type. And you can see herpes virus and COVID here are the most studied. And in this last slide, I'm showing you data on mechanisms of action which emerged from the papers when they were studied by the authors, which is not always the case. And this last synoptic table shows you the overall evaluation of a study according to efficacy, EC50, selectivity index, and risk of bias. And as you can see, it's divided in 4 categories from bad, the -2, very good, which is +3. Now, I have mentioned many times the term risk of bias without really explaining it, so it's time to talk about validity or reliability of the evidence. That is, we need to introduce the concept of quality assessment. Now, not all evidence, obviously, is equally valid, has equal validity. This is kind of obvious in a way. We all know that there are good studies and bad studies, but what do we really mean by the term validity? What is the validity of evidence? How do we measure it? Now, validity measures the extent of a specific type of error, systematic error, which is also called bias. So validity measures the extent of bias in a study and not the truth of the study in any sense, in any absolute sense. And bias, systematic error, is a type of error that produces consistent distortions in results. This is different from this second type of error, which we always encounter in scientific studies, which is random error. Random error, for instance, produces imprecision, but doesn't produce consistent distortions in result in the same direction. And so bias is usually more dangerous than random error because it pushes the result systematically in one direction more than the other. So understanding validity allows us to judge how much confidence a study deserves. And we can distinguish two types of validity relevant to our purpose. One is called internal validity, and the second one is called external validity. Internal validity concerns whether the results are trustworthy within the study itself. So are they coherent? Can we trust them inside of the study? While external validity concerns whether results can be generalized to the outside world, to other, for instance, patients or situations. Internal validity is often evaluated through a risk of bias assessment by using risk of bias tools. And we will see what these tools are because they are really important, especially in systematic reviews. The risk of bias assesses systematic errors in study design or in the conduction of the study. So it studies the blinding, the randomization, and so on, because they can distort results and they can directly lower the quality or the certainty of the evidence, meaning we are less confident that the findings reflect true effects, with a high risk leading to downgrading evidence quality from high to low. And this impacts clinical decisions because if we are not confident in the results, we might not want to implement the result in clinical application. The core principles require that risk of bias assessment is focused. So the internal validity should always be assessed. So focus on the important part, and internal validity is paramount. Extensive, all the relevant threats to internal validity should be included in the evaluation. Applied, it should inform the data synthesis in an appropriate format. So the risk of bias evaluation should translate into a final synthesis. And then transparent. Any assessment should be based on pre-specified and agreed upon criteria detailed in the review protocol. The tools we use to evaluate internal validity allow a formal evaluation of an important factor that determines quality and reliability of a study. They are presented usually as a list of prompting questions to help the researcher to find good answers, and they explore different aspects of study design and conduction, and we will see later on some of these distinctions. They can vary according to study design. They're not the same if we're using them to evaluate clinical studies or mechanistic studies. In our own case of the systematic review we conducted, we used the evaluation tool called the OHAT risk of bias rating tool for human and animal studies, plus the addition of the extension to address in vitro studies. This is a complex of two documents which helped us to organize the systematic review. The tool that we use is divided into 10 questions relating to various key elements of the study, and each question admits 4 different scores. Here you can see the format that we use to evaluate the specific risk of bias. This is the first table, and the format for the overall risk of bias tier in the lower section. And these are the specific prompting questions we use for the evaluation of the papers, divided in 7 subcategories of risk. And this is the final table showing the breakdown of the risk of bias into the 3 categories of mechanistic, animal, and human studies. As you can see, the risk of bias for human studies was pretty high compared to the other ones, reflecting obviously the poor quality of the studies, although there were so few of them, only 5 were admitted, that the results are, in this case, of limited use. We've covered So in this case, the validity or bias issue, but it's crucial to distinguish between this type of research error and the second one I already mentioned, random error. Because while bias is a consistent deviation in the result of a study from their true value, such that it can cause under or overestimation of the true value, random error or precision arises from the unpredictable inaccuracy of estimation that is common in any research studies and is reflected in results that are distributed randomly around the true value. So no preferred direction, but random distribution around the true value. Random error adds noise and is always present in measurement to some extent. There's no way to reduce it to zero. And systematic reviews exist precisely to detect, quantify, and minimize these sources of error. So the final step is where the evidence is synthesized using a systematic approach. It helps in assessing the confidence in the body of evidence for human, animal, and mechanistic studies according to one of four statements: high confidence, moderate confidence, low confidence, or very low or no evidence available. Okay, so we are at the end of this second webinar. So let me give you a final mental exercise. This slide and the next slide present a structured abstract. Read through it carefully and then take your time, 25 to 30 minutes should suffice, and identify the study design, the possible biases that you can infer from reading the abstract, and any missing information you can see. And when you're done, go to the next slide. Now that you've tried to evaluate design, biases, and gaps, you might have formed an initial opinion on the paper. Now, I have no good or correct answer to this exercise. It's an exercise, it wasn't a question, it's just something that I propose for you to ponder. One of the things that I have gained when appraising papers is that many published studies are weaker than they appear. They are presented as strong, but if you look at the methods section, they can be quite weaker than you would expect. And secondly, that being skeptics protects practice. It's good to be skeptical in a rational way to protect yourself from bad clinical decisions based on bad research. And as usual, let me finish with a few reading suggestions. Well, this is an old textbook. I used it many, many years ago, but it still has many interesting arguments on the inner workings of medicine and, in a way, on the philosophy of medicine. And this is a very concise but not simplistic introduction to epidemiology. So I highly suggest this if you never done any epidemiology, or you can go for the complete advanced textbook by the same authors. And this is a very, very good textbook on modern epidemiology. Thank you for your time, and until next webinar, farewell.
All right. Thank you so much, Marco. Oh my goodness. What a great presentation.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So at this time, we are open for questions. And I don't think that I've seen any questions come in the chat. I think people were just riveted and probably never moved. I hope everyone breathed, but I don't know if people moved. So, any questions? And feel free to come on camera if you'd like. Let's see. Let's see. Mimi says, I'm trying to digest all the information shared by Marco because it was so good. Jackie Glinky, yes, same.
Thank you.
Claudia says, thank you for this wonderful class. It is world class for sure. Right. While people think, let me go ahead. I'll say a couple things. And actually, Marco,
Mhm.
I'm going to ask
Yeah.
you if you would introduce your next talk, which is going to be on September 8th. I don't have a title for it in front of me. If you could give us some information.
Yes. Let me. I don't remember exactly the title, but I have the keynote presentation here.
Okay. So the next
So it's yeah
presentation is
from
September
yeah
8th.
the the next seminar will be on from going from evidence to publication. So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
concerned with what happens right after you thought you finished your job, like writing the paper and collecting all the information and blah blah blah. But then there's a whole process beyond that, which is as important as that of the writing up the paper.
Mhm.
Um, so that's what I will cover from a positive and critical point of view. Obviously, publishing is paramount for science because publishing means offering your ideas in the public arena, open to critical thought from the others. And if you survive the critics, then your version is stronger. If you don't, then you do something else. Um, so it's
Marco,
very
we do
important.
have a question. We have a
Oh,
question. So, Christina, you're up. Hi, Christina.
Hi.
hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for that. And I came to your last class as well. So inspiring, actually.
Well,
My question is, have you had any experience or knowledge of, suppose you go through the experiment, you go through the research, you go through the study, and it's discovered there are biases, or maybe the results are not, uh, they're just um, not it's not what you expected, but meaning like maybe they're not valid or something. Do you know, do people still publish them with that disclaimer, or is there a point where people then just say, you know, maybe it's just this study is not um, a good study?
Well, I mean, these are two different things. One thing is for me as a researcher to do a systematic evaluation of the literature. I'm not there to find someone that doesn't do the job properly. I'm just examining literature. If I do find, and the kind of evaluation you do when you do a systematic review, it's usually more on the structure of the paper and the biases that you can see. It's not really about, I know it's not true or I know it's true. I'm just saying the way you wrote your article, it doesn't follow what you're saying. It doesn't follow because your article was badly written and it doesn't make any sense. I'm not saying you're wrong. Maybe if you repeat the experiment and you do the experiment the right way, then you get the positive results. So you were right, but the method you used was wrong or not wrong. It's not black and white. Sometimes designs are optimal, sometimes are a bit less than optimal. You always have to make concessions because we cannot all run the best clinical experiment because it takes a lot of time and money. So what I want to say is that maybe what you're referring to is, what if I find that someone completely faked a paper? Then that's a fraud, and that obviously they have to take the article away from the public arena because it's a fake article. If it's badly done, it's not, I mean, there's no moral judgment. You just say you haven't conducted a very good
paper, so it doesn't have good quality. So, and I'm telling you that the evidence that you're offering is not trustworthy, but it's not fake. It's just badly done. Bad science, but not fake science. Sorry, bubbling away.
No, it was great. And let me just say, you mentioned that there were different, I loved it that you had different categories of papers that you reviewed, and you were very systematic about that part as well. This was a huge review. When you get was it 196 in the end?
Yeah.
That's a huge amount. Most of the reviews that I read, 31 is a big number. Is 16. Sometimes when I see them and they come up with 12, I'm like, well, why did you publish this? I don't know. Sometimes it's like, wait, that's not a lot. But you had 5 human studies.
Actually, 8, because
8.
when we
Okay.
did the first round, we responded to the first round of critical comments by the peer reviewers. We decided to do a post hoc
Oh,
change to the protocol, which was allowed because it didn't impinge on the results. But we accepted more clinical papers.
wow. So that
Just
and that
because,
came from the review process.
yeah, I mean, they said you are leaving out some interesting human trials just because they're using mixtures. And because we said in the protocol, we were not studying blends because that would have made an explosion of papers and very difficult to assess because, blends are blends. But it was true that there were 3 or 4 human trials which were of good quality, which were not accepted because of that. So what we did, we went to read again these papers and decided to accept only those that used fixed blends which were tested before in the same format. So in a way, in a process of becoming either a food supplement or a drug. And that's because we knew there was stability in the mixture. So it makes more sense to allow them in and to treat the blend as if it were one essential oil. It's not true, but it's close enough because it's a stable mixture. So, I mean, we could have gone the other way. We did this to have a few more human studies.
So in what you showed us, did it include the 8 or the 5?
No, the 5. That was
Okay.
the last minute change of a week ago.
All right. There's something from Anna in the chat. Do you believe EU policy since the mid-90s to prioritize funding research where an industrial partner would utilize the results and not funding basic research without commercial interest has affected the quality and bias-free character of research? Do you believe that because of the industrial
This is a very complex question, which would require many hours of discussion because European policies are not a simple thing. But I mean, as all policies, policies are made by human beings with interests, and politics is about compromises. So yes, of course, the way we study things especially in the biomedical sector, is heavily influenced by those who have a lot of money and commercial interest. There's no denying that. That's I would say, almost obvious. There are, however, I mean, systematic reviews and in general, systematic analytical tools as well as other types of analysis, like a more industrial one. But even systematic reviews are a way to show biases which are not obvious to the quick reader, the fast reader. and which might not become obvious if you don't do a systematic research, because the systematic research also allows you to see patterns in the way the information, the research is done, and allows you, for instance, to pinpoint whether certain journals are not serious journals, like, they're not there for the interest of science, they're there because of the money. And you can discover that also through the patterns of publications. Sorry, blabbing
You
away.
can, but you would find that more in a bibliometric review, which would actually show you the metrics of where things are published, when they're published, what is published, and how they are published, which is very informative, and it's something that it goes right alongside of the type of review that you did. There's so many types of reviews, and I thought you did a really nice job in laying those out without getting in the weeds. So thank you, Marco.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, comments? Not hearing any, and you can interrupt me. Anybody can interrupt me if you'd like. I'm going to go on with a little bit of my script, and we're going to close out this webinar. Once again, I want to give a shout out to the Gat Fossé Foundation, the sponsor of the Alliance of International Aromatherapists Research Academy, which has presented this wonderful webinar today. We have many more of these, and we have our mentoring. So the AIA Research Academy is two branches. It has the webinars, teaching, and high-level help for those who want to look into and publish with aromatherapy research. But we also have mentoring. So there's one-to-one and there's group mentoring. And if you're interested in that, publish a case study to create some kind of research, then we encourage you to reach out to us. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending today.
Thank you.
That wraps up today's session. Thanks for tuning into the AIA Research Academy. This academy exists thanks to the generous support of the Gat Fossé Foundation and is here to make aromatherapy research fun, accessible, and relevant. Our mission is simple yet powerful: to educate, inspire, and connect a global community committed to advancing the science of aromatherapy. We envision a future where research is not just part of the conversation, but the culture. The best part, access is completely free. Simply sign up through the link in the description box below. And if you're an AIA member, the Academy is already part of your member benefits, putting powerful resources right at your fingertips. If you're passionate about deepening your understanding of aromatherapy through research, you're in the right place. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay connected with our latest sessions. We appreciate your curiosity, your time, and your commitment to learning.